My beloved child, something has shifted behind the scenes, and the reason your soulmate suddenly feels such a powerful pull toward marriage is not what anyone around them would expect. This is not simply about excitement. It is not about rushing toward a beautiful moment. Something deeper has been forming quietly inside them, and recently, they recognized a truth they could no longer ignore. Stay a little longer, because the smallest detail in this message may explain why their thoughts about you have changed so quickly. For a long time, your soulmate believed there would always be more time. More time to understand their feelings. More time to decide what they truly wanted. More time to wait until everything looked perfect. But then something happened. Not something dramatic that everyone could see. It was quieter than that. They began imagining their future without forcing your presence into it. And somehow, you were already there. In the ordinary mornings. In the important decisions. In the celebrations nobody has planned yet. In the peaceful moments after difficult days. That realization unsettled them in the most unexpected way, because suddenly they understood something they had been avoiding. They were no longer wondering whether you could belong in their future. They were wondering why they had waited so long to admit that they wanted you there. But listen closely. That still isn't the real reason they want to marry you so fast. There is another layer. Your soulmate has started noticing strange little confirmations in their own life. Conversations arriving at exactly the right moment. Thoughts about commitment appearing when they least expect them. A growing certainty replacing questions that once seemed impossible to answer. Almost as though life itself has been quietly pointing toward one conclusion. And that conclusion is you. What if the speed you're sensing isn't coming from impatience? What if it is coming from clarity? Because when someone spends a long time uncertain, the moment certainty finally arrives can feel incredibly fast. One day they are questioning everything. Then suddenly, they know. And your soulmate is approaching that kind of moment. They are beginning to understand that marriage, in their heart, is not about creating a perfect story for other people to admire. It is about choosing the person beside whom they can become more honest, more grounded, and more fully themselves. And somehow, when they picture that person, they keep returning to you. But don't move away from this message yet. Because there is one specific realization that accelerated everything, and your soulmate wasn't prepared for how deeply it would affect them. They realized they weren't only thinking about having you. They were thinking about building with you. A home filled with conversations that matter. Plans created together. Dreams that become bigger because two people are carrying them instead of one. A future where neither person has to pretend to be perfect. And this is where the revelation becomes even more powerful. The sign wasn't telling them to hurry blindly. It was showing them what they could lose by endlessly postponing something their heart had already recognized. There is a difference. And your soulmate is finally beginning to see it. For perhaps the first time, they are asking themselves a question they once avoided. If I already know who I want beside me when the future arrives, what exactly am I waiting for? That question changed something. Stay till the next turning point, because the answer they discovered opened an entirely different door. Your soulmate remembered moments involving you that seemed insignificant when they happened. a certain conversation, a feeling of being understood, a moment when your presence brought an unexpected sense of calm. Tiny pieces that once looked disconnected suddenly began fitting together. And when they did, your soulmate saw a pattern. Not perfection. Not fantasy. Potential. The kind of potential that makes someone stop thinking only about tomorrow and start imagining years ahead. That is why their energy toward commitment feels different now. They are not simply falling toward an emotion. They are waking up to a decision. And there is still one truth they haven't said aloud. One reason this marriage thought has become so urgent inside them. It has something to do with the future they recently imagined, and what they saw themselves becoming with you beside them. That revelation changes the entire meaning of why they want to move so fast. Here is where everything begins to look different, because your soulmate's biggest realization was never simply, "I want to marry this person." It was something far more personal. They suddenly understood who they could become beside you. And that thought stayed with them. At first, they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were simply imagining possibilities, getting carried away by emotion, looking too far into a future that hadn't arrived yet. But the feeling kept returning. Not as pressure. As clarity. They pictured themselves years from now, looking back at this exact chapter of their life, and one question appeared with surprising force. What if I recognize something extraordinary, but hesitate until the moment passes? That question changed their perspective. Because your soulmate has spent enough time waiting for absolute certainty. They have learned that life rarely hands anyone a perfect map before asking them to move forward. Sometimes clarity arrives differently. It appears through consistency. Through peace. Through the way someone makes you think differently about your future. And somehow, you have become connected to all three. But stay with this, because there is a detail they haven't told anyone. Your soulmate has quietly imagined what choosing you would actually mean. Not the celebration. Not the photographs. Not the attention. The life afterward. They imagined ordinary evenings when nothing spectacular was happening, yet being together still felt meaningful. They imagined disagreements followed by understanding. Plans changing. Dreams evolving. Two people becoming stronger without losing themselves. And suddenly marriage stopped looking like one enormous moment. It started looking like thousands of smaller moments shared with the same person. That was when their heart became unusually quiet. Because the person appearing inside those moments was you. And then came the second realization. They don't want to marry quickly because they are trying to escape their present. They want to move forward because, for the first time, their future feels like somewhere they genuinely want to arrive. You might miss the turning point if you leave here, because this is where the meaning behind those signs becomes clearer. The repeated reminders your soulmate has been noticing were never about blindly racing toward a decision. They were about awareness. Pay attention to what brings peace. Notice who encourages growth. Recognize what continues returning to your heart even after excitement becomes quiet. And whenever your soulmate followed those questions honestly, their thoughts returned to the same place. You. If this message reminds you of someone important, you can share it with someone who might need its meaning, leave a comment with the word clarity, and subscribe if these stories help you reflect on your own journey. Now listen carefully. Because your soulmate recently asked themselves another question, and this one changed everything. Why does waiting suddenly feel harder than choosing? The answer surprised them. They realized they weren't afraid of commitment itself anymore. They were becoming more concerned about allowing hesitation to make decisions for them. There were things they still wanted to understand. Conversations they still wanted to have. Plans that still needed patience. But underneath all of that was a growing truth. They could finally imagine choosing one person deliberately and continuing to choose them as life changed. And that person was you. Yet there is one final piece they haven't fully understood. Something about you makes this connection feel different from what they expected love to feel like. It isn't simply intensity. It isn't simply attraction. It is the strange feeling that meeting you interrupted an old version of their future. Before you, they imagined one path. After you, another path became visible. And somewhere deep inside, they have started believing that the second path leads toward the person they were always capable of becoming. But there is something about that future they haven't told you yet. One specific promise they have been silently making whenever they imagine marriage with you. And once you hear what that promise is, you'll understand why this decision suddenly feels so important to them. The promise they have been carrying is quieter than you might expect, but it reveals more than any dramatic confession ever could. Your soulmate has been telling themselves, if I ever get the chance to build something real with this person, I will not treat it casually. That is the promise. And suddenly, so many things begin to make sense. Why commitment has been occupying their thoughts. Why the future feels closer than it did before. Why marriage no longer seems like some distant chapter waiting years ahead. Something inside them has matured. They are no longer asking only, what can this connection give me? A completely different question has appeared. What can we create together? Hold on to that difference. Because it changes the entire story. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that meaningful partnership is not about finding someone who magically removes every challenge. It is about recognizing someone with whom growth feels possible. Someone who inspires honesty instead of performance. Someone who can stand beside your dreams without needing to become the center of them. Someone whose presence makes the future feel less like a mystery to fear and more like a journey worth preparing for. And whenever your soulmate thinks about those qualities, their mind keeps returning to you. But there is another discovery. One they didn't expect. They realized that some of their previous hesitation had very little to do with you. It came from old expectations about timing. They thought certain things had to happen first. They needed to become more successful. More certain. More prepared. They imagined there would eventually be a perfect moment when every question disappeared and commitment suddenly became effortless. Then life taught them something. Perfect timing may never announce itself. Sometimes two people simply reach a point where continuing forward together becomes more meaningful than endlessly waiting for every circumstance to align. That realization is why everything suddenly appears to be accelerating. Not because your soulmate wants to skip important steps. Quite the opposite. They finally understand the importance of those steps. The conversations. The trust. The patience. The choices made when nobody else is watching. Wait until you hear what changed inside their vision of marriage. They stopped imagining marriage as an ending. They started seeing it as a beginning. A beginning where both people continue discovering each other. Where dreams are allowed to change. Where neither person must become smaller for the relationship to survive. Where love isn't measured only through grand gestures, but through consistency. And in that vision, something remarkable happened. Your soulmate saw you not standing behind them. Not standing ahead of them. But beside them. That image affected them more deeply than they expected. Because somewhere inside, they realized that is what they have actually been searching for. Not someone to complete an unfinished person. A companion for an unfinished journey. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning behind everything they have been interpreting as guidance from heaven. Not a guarantee. Not a command. An invitation to notice what is already becoming clear inside their own heart. There is something huge hidden inside that distinction. Because real clarity doesn't remove choice. It makes choice meaningful. Your soulmate still has decisions to make, words to speak, and actions to take. A future together cannot be created by signs alone. It must be built. Slowly enough to understand each other. Boldly enough not to let fear make every decision. Honestly enough that neither person needs to pretend. And now your soulmate knows exactly what they want their next chapter to contain. Not simply a wedding. Not simply a promise spoken once. They want the everyday life that comes afterward. They want the laughter nobody photographs. The plans nobody else knows about. The quiet victories. The unexpected changes. The years when both of you look back and realize how much you have grown. That is why marriage suddenly feels closer in their imagination. Because they are no longer fascinated only by the moment of choosing you. They are fascinated by the possibility of continuing to choose you. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all. They don't want to rush toward one perfect day. They want to stop running away from the possibility of an extraordinary future. A future that, whenever they allow themselves to picture it clearly, keeps placing you beside them. Now comes the detail your soulmate could not explain at first. The moment when their desire for marriage stopped feeling like a passing thought and started feeling like a decision waiting to be spoken. It happened when they imagined reaching an important milestone without you. For just a moment, they pictured the achievement, the celebration, the future they had always worked toward. Everything looked right. Yet something felt incomplete. And that realization surprised them. They didn't want you beside them because they needed someone to validate their success. They wanted you there because somewhere along the way, sharing life with you became more meaningful than simply proving they could build one alone. That distinction changed everything. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why thoughts of marriage had been arriving with such intensity. They weren't chasing a ceremony. They were recognizing companionship. Stay close to this message, because the next realization goes even deeper. Your soulmate began asking what they would actually protect if you built a future together. The answer wasn't an image. It wasn't appearances. It wasn't what other people might think about the relationship. They wanted to protect the honesty between you. The freedom to speak without pretending. The ability to keep growing as individuals while still building something together. And most importantly, they wanted to protect the feeling that neither of you would have to earn love by becoming somebody else. That became the silent promise. I want this person to feel chosen without feeling controlled. Read that inside your heart again. Because mature commitment isn't about holding someone so tightly that they cannot move. It is about creating enough trust that both people can keep becoming who they are meant to become, and still want to return to each other. That is the future your soulmate has started imagining. And perhaps this is why the signs they have been noticing feel so different now. They aren't pushing your soulmate toward recklessness. They are pushing them toward truth. Toward conversations they have postponed. Toward questions they need to ask. Toward the courage to discover whether the future they imagine can become something both of you genuinely choose. There is no meaningful destiny without choice. And there is no lasting partnership without two voices saying yes to the same direction. That is why your soulmate's next move matters more than all the signs that came before it. They know feelings alone are not enough. They need to communicate. They need to listen. They need to understand what you want, too. If this story has given you something meaningful to think about, share it with someone who believes relationships should be built with intention. Leave a comment with the word future, and subscribe if you want to stay connected to messages like this. But before you go anywhere, hear this. There is still one question your soulmate hasn't answered. And strangely, it may be the most important question of all. They know why they can imagine marrying you. They know why waiting suddenly feels different. They know why their future keeps placing you somewhere inside it. But now they are asking, would this person choose the same future if I finally told them everything? That question has made them rethink how they will approach you. Not with pressure. Not with assumptions. With honesty. Because your soulmate doesn't simply want you to say yes to marriage. They want you to understand why they are choosing you. They want the decision to belong to both of you. And somewhere inside that realization, the meaning of this entire journey becomes clear. The greatest sign wasn't something outside them. It was the moment they stopped asking whether you fit into their future and started asking whether they could become someone worthy of building that future beside you. And there is one final revelation still waiting. It concerns the exact future your soulmate secretly pictured when they finally admitted, yes, this is the person I could marry. That picture reveals what they truly want from you, and it is probably not what you think. The final picture in your soulmate's mind was surprisingly simple, and that simplicity is exactly what made it impossible for them to ignore. There was no perfect setting. No crowd watching. No extraordinary celebration. They simply imagined coming home after a long day, finding you there, and realizing they had someone with whom they could share the version of themselves the outside world rarely gets to see. And something inside them whispered, this is what I have actually been looking for. Not perfection. Belonging. Not constant excitement. A connection that still matters when everything becomes quiet. That was the moment the entire idea of marriage changed for them. Because your soulmate finally understood that the future they want isn't built from one unforgettable day. It is built from ordinary days that become unforgettable because of who shares them. But there is something even more revealing. When they imagined marrying you, they didn't picture you changing to fit their life. They pictured both of your lives expanding. Your dreams continuing. Their dreams continuing. New dreams appearing between you that neither of you could have imagined alone. And suddenly, their urgency made sense. They aren't trying to race against time. They are becoming aware of its value. There is a difference. Your soulmate has started realizing how easily people postpone meaningful conversations because they assume another opportunity will always appear. Tomorrow. Next month. Someday when everything feels easier. But what if clarity isn't asking for a perfect moment? What if it is simply asking for an honest one? That question has been following your soulmate. And now they are beginning to understand the deeper message behind everything they interpreted as guidance. The message was never, move quickly because you might lose everything. It was gentler than that. Stop pretending you don't know what matters to you. And just when your soulmate thought they finally understood everything, one last realization appeared, and it completely changed what soon meant to them. They had been thinking about timing as though marriage were a finish line. First, everything had to become stable. Then every uncertainty had to disappear. Then every plan had to be perfectly organized. Only after that could they confidently move toward you. But suddenly they saw the flaw in that thinking. Life would keep changing. New responsibilities would appear. New dreams would replace old ones. Unexpected opportunities would rearrange plans that once seemed permanent. There might never be a flawless moment. And strangely, that realization didn't make them impatient. It made them intentional. Because now they understand that wanting to marry you quickly doesn't have to mean skipping the process of truly knowing you. It can mean they no longer want to waste meaningful time pretending this connection is insignificant. Don't skip this thought, because it carries the deepest shift yet. Your soulmate has stopped asking, how quickly can this happen? Now they are asking, how sincerely can we build toward it? That single change has transformed everything. They want conversations that go beyond surface-level feelings. They want to understand what gives you hope. What kind of future excites you? What values you refuse to compromise? What dreams you protect when nobody else understands them? And they want you to know those things about them too. Because the future appearing in their imagination isn't based on two perfect people. It is based on two honest people choosing to keep learning. Something huge is waiting inside that realization. Your soulmate has discovered that the strongest reason for commitment isn't the fear of losing someone. It is the desire to build something worth keeping. That is why their thoughts feel different now. They aren't imagining how impressive your story could look from the outside. They are imagining what it could feel like from within. Peace after exhausting days. Laughter over things nobody else would understand. Encouragement when one of you begins doubting a dream. Enough independence for both of you to keep growing, and enough connection to celebrate that growth together. And suddenly the message they had been searching for became remarkably clear. A meaningful future isn't discovered fully formed. It is created through choices. One honest conversation. One act of patience. One moment of listening. One decision to show up again tomorrow. Then another. And another. Until one day, two people look behind them and realize they have built something neither could have created alone. That is what your soulmate wants. Not ownership. Partnership. Not a fantasy where nothing ever changes. A relationship strong enough to change with both of you. And now their imagined proposal carries a completely different meaning. They don't want to stand before you pretending they know everything about the future. They want to stand before you knowing that they don't, and still believe discovering it together could be extraordinary. Before you go, hear this final line. Perhaps heaven's greatest revelation wasn't that your soulmate must marry you quickly. Perhaps it was showing them why they wanted to marry you at all. Because when they stripped away appearances, expectations, perfect timing, and every imagined opinion from the outside world, one truth remained. They didn't simply see you inside their future. They saw themselves becoming more courageous about the future because you were there. And now the rush inside their heart has become something calmer. Something stronger. Purpose. Your soulmate knows the next chapter cannot be written by imagination alone. There must be truth. There must be mutual choice. There must be patience alongside courage. And when the moment finally arrives for them to speak, they may not need a perfect speech. They may simply need enough courage to look toward you and say, I can imagine an incredible future. But I don't want to decide it for you. I want to discover whether you can imagine it too. And perhaps that is where the real story begins, but there is a chapter beyond that conversation, and your soulmate has only recently allowed themselves to imagine it. Not the proposal. Not the answer. What happens afterward? Because they finally asked themselves a question that exposed the deepest reason behind this sudden desire for commitment. If we truly choose each other, what kind of life would I want us to create? For several moments, there was no complicated answer. Then one word appeared. Freedom. Not freedom from each other. Freedom with each other. The freedom to dream without being laughed at. To change direction without being judged for becoming different. To admit uncertainty without pretending everything is fine. To celebrate each other's victories without turning love into competition. Your soulmate realized they don't simply want someone standing beside them. They want a relationship where both people become more alive because they chose to walk together. And somehow, whenever they imagine that kind of partnership, they imagine you. Stay a little longer, because this is where the future they pictured becomes unexpectedly specific. Your soulmate imagined a morning years from now. Nothing extraordinary was happening. There were responsibilities waiting. Plans to complete. Decisions to make. Yet before the day began, they looked across the room and felt something they had once believed only existed in perfect stories. Gratitude. Not because every day had been easy. Because you had both remained willing to understand each other through the changes. That image stayed with them. And then another appeared. They imagined you succeeding at something you had once doubted you could achieve. Instead of feeling threatened by your growth, they imagined being the person celebrating the loudest. That surprised them. Because suddenly they understood something about real commitment. Marriage isn't simply asking someone to enter your world. It is making room for their world too. That thought reached somewhere deep inside them. Maybe this is what all those strange moments of clarity were pointing toward. Not a prediction written somewhere beyond your control. A possibility. A future that becomes available when two people deliberately create it. But wait, there is another shift you need to hear. Your soulmate has begun separating urgency from pressure. They know those are not the same thing. Pressure says, decide immediately. Clarity says, stop hiding from the conversation. And your soulmate no longer wants to hide. They want to know what you imagine when you think about the years ahead. What kind of home feels peaceful to you? What experiences you want to have? What dreams you haven't spoken about yet? What kind of partnership would make you feel respected, understood, and free to keep growing? Because something has become incredibly important to them. They don't want their dream of marriage to erase your dream of life. They want those dreams to meet. Think about that. The reason everything feels fast inside their heart may be because their understanding has suddenly become deeper. Yesterday, they were thinking about whether they loved you enough to commit. Now they are thinking about whether they are ready to love you wisely enough to build. Those are completely different questions. And the second one has changed them. They have started noticing the places where they still need to grow. The habits they need to improve. The conversations they need to stop postponing. The promises they should never make unless they intend to keep them. Your soulmate is realizing that asking for your future also means becoming responsible for how they show up inside it. And that realization has slowed something down while speeding something else up. Their fantasy has slowed down. Their intention has accelerated. Now they don't simply want to reach marriage quickly. They want to become ready for what marriage actually asks from two people. Patience. Respect. Curiosity. Consistency. And the courage to keep choosing truth when assumptions would be easier. There is still one final mystery inside all of this. Your soulmate recently imagined one question coming from you, a question so simple that it stopped every beautiful picture in their mind. They imagined you looking directly at them and asking, "Why me?" And for the first time, they realized the answer couldn't be about destiny alone. It couldn't be about signs. It couldn't even be about how strongly they felt. Their answer had to come from something real. Something they had noticed about you that changed how they understood love itself. And the moment they discovered that answer, your soulmate finally knew exactly what they wanted to tell you.